Prepare yourself to witness absolute history, because what is about to unfold is arguably the most intense, jaw-dropping confrontation ever captured on camera between a badge-wearing enforcer and a judicial titan. It represents a catastrophic lapse in judgment, where a 38-year-old police sergeant steps into the legendary courtroom of Judge Caprio and actually attempts to lecture the man on the law. This choice doesn't just incinerate his career, it becomes a viral masterclass on why arrogance is the ultimate downfall, perfectly illustrating what happens when a uniform is mistaken for a crown, and when an officer learns that the authority to enforce laws is worlds apart from the wisdom required to interpret them. But before we plunge into the details of this unbelievable legal dismantling, I need to point something out. Less than 3% of you watching are actually subscribed. So hit that button now, because this story of professional self-destruction and the essential check on authority deserves to be seen by everyone who understands that respect for the legal system must work both ways. Picture an ordinary Wednesday morning inside Providence Municipal Court. The spring air is crisp, and the docket is stacked with the usual monotony of speeding tickets and minor violations. But the atmosphere is about to shift from routine to radioactive at precisely 10:45 a.m. when the doors swing open. Not with the nervous hesitation of a typical defendant, but with the heavy, rhythmic stomp of combat boots belonging to Sergeant Derek Thompson. He isn't merely entering the room. He's striding in with the unmistakable swagger of a man who has spent 15 years believing his badge is a personal get-out-of-jail-free card. His uniform is pressed to perfection, his boots polished like mirrors, all carefully designed to conceal a massive superiority complex. Thompson isn't here for heroism today. He's here because of pure entitlement. 3 weeks earlier, he was cited for parking his personal vehicle in a handicapped spot outside Tony's restaurant so he could grab lunch. He was off duty when he did it, but he believed the rules applied to civilians, not sergeants. Now facing a routine $300 fine, Thompson hasn't come to apologize. He's marched into court to demand an exemption, completely unaware that he's about to confront a judge who was interpreting statutes before Thompson was even born. He believes his rank gives him leverage. What he's about to learn is that in Judge Caprio's courtroom, a badge doesn't grant immunity. It demands a higher standard. And Thompson is blindly walking into a public dismantling that will leave the entire courtroom stunned. As Thompson advances toward the defendant's stand, every step is calculated to project dominance. His body language aggressively drains the oxygen from the room. He deliberately violates basic courtroom etiquette by refusing to remove his police cap, planting his feet wide and pushing his badge forward as if silently announcing that his law enforcement status makes him untouchable. When the court clerk calls his name from the docket, Thompson steps forward with visible impatience etched across his face. His hand settles heavily on his duty belt, a gesture that feels far more like a threat than an act of respect. Judge Caprio, a man who has witnessed every trick imaginable over decades on the bench, looks up from his paperwork with the sharp, evaluative gaze of a veteran jurist. Instantly, he sees Thompson not as a public servant, but as a man convinced the laws he enforces simply don't apply to him. The judge's voice remains calm and measured as he reads the charge, a straightforward violation of City Ordinance 127 for parking in a handicapped spot while off duty outside Tony's restaurant. But when he asks for a plea, Thompson's response instantly changes the energy in the room, creating a tension thick enough to slice with a knife. "Your Honor," Thompson begins, but the tone is wrong. It's patronizing, the voice of someone explaining basic ideas to a slow child. He declares himself not guilty, claiming the citation represents a fundamental misapplication of policies concerning sworn officers. It's a blatant lie wrapped in bureaucratic language. Judge Caprio slowly sets down his pen, a subtle yet chilling signal that the defendant has just crossed a dangerous line. The judge asks the million-dollar question, "Were you on duty?" Forced to admit that he was not, Thompson attempts to pivot, arguing that sworn officers require flexible interpretation of civilian restrictions. The silence that settles over the courtroom is heavy and absolute as everyone realizes Thompson has just argued, on public record, that police officers are a separate class of citizens who can ignore laws they dislike. Judge Caprio presses further, asking if Thompson was responding to an emergency. Thompson's mask slips, revealing irritation at being questioned like an ordinary civilian. He snaps back about operational flexibility and readiness, a vague excuse that holds zero legal weight. Recognizing the bluff, Judge Caprio calls it. He asks Thompson to cite the specific written statute that grants this supposed exemption to off-duty officers. Thompson freezes, caught flat-footed, because he knows no such statute exists. But instead of backing down, he doubles down with pure arrogance, claiming operational protocols supersede municipal ordinances and adding the biting remark that any experienced professional would know this. The disrespect is unmistakable. Thompson has effectively suggested the judge is incompetent. But he isn't done. In the single worst decision of his career, Thompson goes for the jugular. With a sneer, he tells Judge Caprio that his 15 years on the street give him a superior understanding of how the law works compared to someone who only sees it from behind a bench. The courtroom erupts in shocked gasps and whispered disbelief. Spectators are stunned that a police sergeant would dare imply that writing tickets makes him smarter than the judge presiding over him, completely unaware that he has just insulted the one man capable of systematically dismantling his career. What Judge Caprio does next is the legal equivalent of a grandmaster sealing a trap on an unsuspecting novice. A methodical destruction of arrogance begins with a gesture so subtle, yet so terrifying, that it signals the debate is already over. He slowly removes his glasses. He places them on the bench with deliberate, heavy precision, the unmistakable sign of a man finished with pleasantries and ready to deliver a lesson that will echo for a lifetime. Looking directly at Thompson with the calm, controlled expression that has made him an icon of the bench, his voice perfectly measured and betraying none of the anger beneath the surface, Judge Caprio prepares his ultimate trap question, seeking to clarify if Thompson is effectively claiming that his 15 years wearing the badge somehow outrank the authority of the court itself. Completely misjudging the moment and mistaking the judge's calm composure for doubt or weakness, Thompson chooses to escalate his disrespect even further, causing everyone in the courtroom to visibly tense. With a smug, condescending tone, he begins explaining that real-world policing is full of complexities that purely academic thinkers like the judge could never truly understand. Judge Caprio slowly nods, appearing to consider the statement, before calmly reaching for a thick file that has been resting on his desk like a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. He smoothly shifts the focus, asking Thompson to formally state his rank and current assignment. And when Thompson proudly straightens his posture and announces that he is a sergeant and the supervisor of the traffic division, the trap slams shut instantly. The irony is overwhelming. This is the very man responsible for overseeing the enforcement of the exact laws he is now attempting to evade, and Caprio wastes no time exploiting this contradiction. He asks a question that places Thompson in an impossible position. How do you instruct your officers to deal with off-duty personnel who violate parking regulations? Thompson hesitates, the realization dawning in his eyes that there is no safe answer. If he claims officers should ignore it, he confesses to corruption. If he admits they should enforce it, he exposes his own hypocrisy. He tries to dodge the question using vague administrative language and procedural buzzwords. But Caprio cuts through the nonsense, demanding a direct yes or no answer on whether a badge grants immunity. Forced to say no, Thompson's confidence begins to crumble, because he has just acknowledged on the record that no such exemption exists under Rhode Island law. And Caprio is far from finished. He shuts down Thompson's attempt to argue discretion, reminding him that he is not an officer making a split-second decision on the street. He is a defendant standing in a courtroom claiming he is above the law. Then comes the decisive strike. Caprio retrieves another document from the file and reveals that he has personally reviewed the Providence Police Department Policy Manual, specifically Section 4.2.3, which clearly states that off-duty officers are subject to all civilian laws. Thompson's face drains of color instantly as the realization hits him like a punch to the chest. The judge knows his own department's rules better than he does. The courtroom falls into stunned silence as Thompson is forced to admit he knew about the policy he deliberately ignored. Just when it seems his humiliation cannot deepen, Judge Caprio reveals that this incident is not a one-time lapse but part of a recurring pattern. Turning another page, he references Thompson's internal affairs history, citing 2 prior reprimands for abuse of authority and unprofessional behavior, and calmly asks, "Does that sound familiar?" One report explicitly notes Thompson's dangerous belief that his badge places him above civilian rules, the exact argument he just tried to use against the court. Thompson, now visibly shaken, attempts to argue that his personnel record is irrelevant to a parking violation. Caprio immediately shuts that down, explaining with surgical precision that it is entirely relevant because Thompson is displaying the same toxic entitlement in court that has already damaged his career. The judge's voice rises with undeniable authority as he lists the offenses, challenging the court, claiming special privileges, and reinforcing a documented history of misconduct. Then comes the ruling that stuns the room. Caprio finds Thompson guilty and imposes the maximum fine. But he does not stop there. He adds a contempt of court charge for blatant disrespect and abuse of position. As Thompson stands frozen in disbelief, Caprio delivers the professional knockout punch, announcing that the full transcript will be forwarded to Internal Affairs along with a judicial recommendation for mandatory retraining. The room buzzes as the consequences sink in, but Caprio delivers one final, devastating directive. He formally recommends a departmental review of Thompson's fitness to serve in a supervisory role, making it clear that a man who does not understand the law has no business enforcing it or leading others. Thompson appears to physically wilt under the weight of his own actions. Desperate, he pleads, "Your Honor, you can't destroy my career over a parking ticket." Caprio responds without hesitation, stepping out of emotional distance to deliver the most powerful line of the entire encounter. "I'm not destroying your career," he says firmly. "You destroyed it the moment you chose to argue with a sitting judge while proving you don't understand the law or your own department's policies. It is total defeat." Backed by 45 years of legal practice and 35 years on the bench, Caprio reminds him that the badge represents service, not ego, and that challenging the system you swore to uphold is a battle you will always lose. Leaning forward, his tone heavy and disappointed like a commander addressing a disgraced officer, Caprio reminds the courtroom that he has overseen more than 400,000 cases, including criminal trials and internal affairs matters, and that experience has taught him one chilling truth. The most dangerous officer is the one who believes his badge places him above accountability. Thompson stands motionless, his earlier arrogance completely erased, forced to hear that he came in believing his uniform would intimidate the court, but instead only proved why his department has repeatedly disciplined him for abusing authority. As Caprio returns to the bench to conclude, he draws a clear line between small violations and major ones, warning that an officer who disrespects judicial authority will eventually disrespect constitutional rights. Because a sergeant who treats parking laws as optional will soon treat every law the same way. The judge picks up. His gavel comes down and the numbers immediately begin to rise. The original $300 fine is escalated to $800, and a $500 contempt penalty is added on top without hesitation. But the financial damage is insignificant compared to the professional catastrophe now unfolding, because Thompson will be forced to explain to Internal Affairs why a sitting judge has officially questioned his grasp of legal limits. His voice drops to a near whisper as he pleads, "Your Honor, please." But Judge Caprio is far from finished. He returns to Thompson's earlier insult about street experience versus judicial understanding and delivers the ultimate counterstrike. He tells the sergeant that after 35 years on the bench, he has learned that professional humility is not weakness, and that no badge, no matter how polished, has ever functioned as protection from basic accountability. Expanding the lesson beyond the defendant, Caprio scans the crowded gallery, locking eyes with fellow officers who came to observe, and transforms Thompson's failure into a warning for the entire force. "A badge," he says, "represents service, not superiority, and authority flows from the Constitution and the people, not from the uniform itself." Turning back to Thompson one final time, shoulders slumped and head lowered in shame, Caprio offers a final piece of advice, reminding him that the badge does not elevate him above the law, it makes him far more answerable to it. Then he brings the gavel down with a thunderous crack that formally closes the session. The sound echoes through the courtroom with undeniable finality. But the consequences are only beginning, because what unfolds in the weeks that follow becomes definitive proof that challenging judicial authority is a guaranteed path to professional ruin. As the courtroom empties, Thompson remains frozen at the defendant's table, staring blankly at the citation that now totals $1,300. And though he doesn't yet comprehend it, his entire supervisory career and the inflated ego that powered it for 15 years has been systematically dismantled by a soft-spoken 76-year-old judge who never once needed to raise his voice to assert control. Moments later, Captain Maria Rodriguez, his commanding officer who had quietly watched from the gallery, approaches him with an expression blending deep disappointment and professional gravity. She doesn't shout. She calmly tells him that she witnessed everything and that Judge Caprio just modeled the respect and legal mastery Thompson has repeatedly failed to demonstrate in his own leadership role. When Thompson looks up, shattered, attempting to mumble an excuse about things spiraling out of control, she cuts him off immediately, explaining that this exact behavior, the belief that the badge makes him exceptional and his disregard for civilian authority, is precisely what she has been documenting in his performance evaluations for years. His exit from the courthouse turns into a public march of humiliation as local reporters trail him and his phone buzzes non-stop with messages from colleagues already watching the live stream. The footage of his courtroom dismantling explodes online, surpassing 2 million views within the first 24 hours. Law enforcement blogs analyze Caprio's methodical takedown as a textbook example of accountability, while police academies begin using the clip as a what not to do instructional tool. But viral notoriety pales in comparison to the harsh reality awaiting him back at the station, where Internal Affairs launches a formal investigation within days, fueled by the video and Caprio's explicit judicial recommendation. 3 weeks later, Thompson stands before the disciplinary board, where the transcript of his courtroom conduct combined with his prior reprimands creates a devastating portrait of an officer who has become a liability to departmental integrity. The decision is swift and unforgiving. His stripes are removed, demoting him from sergeant back to patrol officer. He is placed on probation for a full year and ordered to complete 40 hours of intensive training in constitutional law, ethics, and civilian relations. It is a brutal but necessary reset, reinforcing the reality that while authority may be granted by a badge, only humility and respect can preserve a career. Thompson had to lose his rank to finally absorb a lesson he should have learned on his first day. When he returns to the courthouse 6 months later, the contrast is striking. Gone is the arrogant supervisor who once tried to intimidate a judge. In his place stands a subdued patrol officer who has learned through consequence that respect for the legal system is the foundation of legitimate policing, not a courtesy. Standing before Judge Caprio without an ounce of swagger, Thompson offers a sincere apology on the record, admitting that his behavior was entirely unacceptable and that the penalties he faced taught him the most important lesson of his life, that wearing a badge means serving the law, never standing above it. Judge Caprio, recognizing the authenticity in his expression, nods with the quiet approval of a mentor watching a hard-earned lesson finally take root. He accepts the apology, noting that humility will make Thompson a far better public servant than arrogance ever could. This moment of redemption becomes widely discussed within Rhode Island law enforcement, as Thompson does not disappear. He completes his probation, gradually rebuilding trust through consistent discipline and respect for procedure, eventually becoming a mentor who tells academy recruits that Judge Caprio didn't end his career, he saved it by humbling him. He teaches them that a badge offers no special privileges, only immense responsibility, the greatest of which is honoring the system they are sworn to defend. Meanwhile, the original confrontation becomes one of the most widely shared accountability moments ever recorded, used by departments around the world as a training example of professional boundaries. Yet for those who truly understand Judge Caprio, the episode represents something deeper, a perfect reflection of his legacy. The rare ability to correct without cruelty and to teach through justice, proving that real authority is never rooted in intimidation or rank, but in knowledge, preparation, and unwavering fairness. In a time when trust between police and communities is fragile, Judge Frank Caprio demonstrated that accountability is the bridge that protects everyone, officers, courts, and citizens alike, reminding the world that respect for the law is not just demanded from the public, but must be relentlessly practiced by those entrusted to enforce it, especially when they believe no one is watching.